That should be a combat dodge drill. That's what I should have been looking for.
Yeah, the camera was pulling
What
up.
would you do if one just cut through the roof and it didn't even...
Holy fuck! Shit!
You alright, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. Where the fuck did I hit at?
The gate.
Hey, call him, tell him to hit the gate.
Hey, we just had one at the main gate up front. Holy
Shit.
fuck. I said that over the net.
Okay, I was going to go get my troop over there, but I don't know if
Hey,
anything's covered.
go,
Hey,
Tell them no one's hurt. Nobody's hit. You guys alright? Yeah, where'd it go? Fucking gate.
yeah!
You deployed to Afghanistan twice, the first time in 2009, the second time in 2012. How was your state of mind going into Afghanistan different the second time than it was the first time? Before you go in the first time, you don't know what the air of Afghanistan feels like. You don't know what the smells are like. It's all an abstraction. You get on the ground, you see what it's like. Now you're flying in for the second time. You have a lot of experience behind you. How would you describe how your mindset was the same and or different?
Well, I certainly knew more of what I was getting into, what potentially I could be getting into the second time around. Obviously, individual deployments vary, depends on the job, depends on the unit and the location. And this time, knowing that I had been injured, I had been forthwith with my command team about it, and they understood that I was injured. I was no longer a sledgehammer. I was more of a finishing hammer. You know, I had to be used properly in the toolbox. And thankfully, they recognized that. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be really heading outside the wire much that deployment, but helping to train the junior medics and run the aid station and everything.
Your first tour, you are outside the wire a lot, which means ambushes, IEDs, firefights. The second tour, it sounds like you're more, you're staying inside the wire. When you knew that was going to be the case on the second tour, were you relieved, disappointed, a mixture of both?
A mixture of both. Yeah. I couldn't pursue the career that I wanted to in the military still with the injuries I had. But I was also very thankful for going on that deployment because despite my injuries, I was able to go, and it helped me with my thought process of rather than focusing on all the things I couldn't do anymore, on all the things I was still fully capable of doing. And that did wonders for me alone.
What was the injury that you had?
Well, I had a really bad heat stroke when I was in Fort Bragg for some training. Got rushed to the ER with a core temp of 108.5.
Wow.
I was in a coma for a day and a half. Got out of that. Got sent home on convalescence leave because I almost died from that. And in the same time frame, my mom got really sick and was critical for a little bit. Went home on mid-tour leave and got into a car accident and broke my neck. So doing those two things, yeah, it was pretty limiting. So yeah, that killed airborne aspirations. Nobody told me I couldn't jump anymore, but with the front and back fused cervical spine, it's not a good idea anymore. Deployment 1 was a lot more kinetic from my point of view, but also, from the aid station point of view, we had a lot of patients coming and going on the regular with lots of trauma. And our mission at that point was more to secure the area, to kind of like lock it down, prevent enemy movement, prevent influx of fighters and equipment from Pakistan, and just to deny enemy movement, because through our AO, that first deployment is where a lot of the supply lines were running into the rest of Afghanistan. So yeah, we got a lot of fresh fighters wanting to cut their teeth on us. Saw a lot of Chechnyan fighters. Um, and they would bring a lot of military training and tactics to the fight with them that they would then teach to the others because the others would just tend to be, general villagers that took up arms and they don't really have a whole lot of idea other than to point it in this direction and squeeze this part of it. So the Chechnyan fighters coming in definitely saw an increased rate of fire in RPGs. Man, those guys could load and let them fly like nothing else. Yeah, a lot more boldness, a lot more tactics. And so our goal was kind of to prevent that. And we helped secure the elections during that year too. So.
When so you're fighting these Chechens who are coming into Afghanistan. Was there a moment when you realized that you were fighting a different enemy? You could just tell by what they were doing that these guys aren't fighting like the guys we dealt with last week or the week before.
Yeah, because there were certain you'd notice changes in tactics, and some of them we started noticing right after Bo Bergdahl got captured is which trucks they'd try to take out first, because before it was just indiscriminate, whichever one was closest to them looked the most threatening. Then they got a lot more specific on which trucks they'd attack first, which made tactical sense, and this was only directly after Bo Bergdahl got caught.
Well, help me understand what you were saying. You noticed that they changed tactics in terms of which vehicle they would hit, and this seemed to correspond with the capture of Bo Bergdahl. What's the connection there?
I'm pretty sure that he was giving intelligence to the enemy, whether under duress or willingly. But from what I know, it seemed like so. I had run into a couple of his platoon mates on my way back from mid-tour leave, and this was right after he left. So they were either on QRF, Quick Reaction Force, or coming back from leave themselves. I forget exactly what their story was,
Yeah.
but I got the scoop from some of his platoon mates. He had always been talking about, oh, I just want to kind of just go off and just live in the mountains, and he gestured to the Hindu Kush. He had a lot of ideals. It seemed that he thought that just the Taliban didn't understand us and we didn't understand them. So if he just went over them and embraced them as a friend, that would bring about peace. It seems to be the gist of it.
Yeah.
So because got a report from a couple kids that when we were out looking for him, we knew where to look and we were close. They said, yeah, an American out of uniform came like low crawling through the dirt this way, asked where the Taliban is. Kids pointed off in a certain direction and he went that direction. So all these stories of, him getting left behind or captured on a patrol is all bull from the beginning. He walked off his base and we knew it from the get-go. And a couple guys got killed out looking for him. I personally got blown up that one day out looking for him.
I want to come back and talk more about this. You referred to an incident when the soldiers you were with were looking for Bergdahl, and we'll come back to that. But let's just summarize the second tour then. So the first tour, you're trying to prevent materiel and enemy forces coming into Afghanistan from Pakistan. And this does involve a lot of combat, ambushes, IDs. How would you summarize the second tour?
Well, being attached to the artillery as opposed to the infantry, it was a different mindset, a different type of energy. They still, of course, went out on missions, and it was a busy area. There were IEDs in our area, snipers, there a couple of different things. We did have a team of Green Berets attached onto our base. We were a pretty large base at that point, and so we'd get some of their casualties. Sometimes we'd hear about some of their gunfights and whatnot, but I guess they mostly kind of ruled our immediate AO because it certainly wasn't as busy in the aid station as it had been the first deployment, from my perspective.
First tour, you were in Paktika province, I believe. And the
Correct.
second tour, where were you?
Logar and Wardak provinces.
I know in the first tour you worked with Afghan forces. Did you also work with Afghan forces in the second tour?
Minimally. We tried to get them to come up and train with us, and very difficult to get them willing and able and at the right spot, the right time, right uniform. Well, and uniforms to us were optional. Hey, come train, but it didn't happen a whole lot. Um, no, I didn't have a whole lot of dealings, except for some security guards at the gate that were pretty decent dudes. But we still had to have eyes there because we'd catch things that they wouldn't. And people were constantly trying to smuggle things off base, onto base. Plant a little bit of explosives here, see if that would sneak through so they could try something bigger later. It was kept you on your toes. Yep.
These are Afghans coming and going from the base who are caught trying to bring explosives onto the base.
I remember one instance of that. Yes. Yes.
So it's the problem of trust then. I mean, it sounds like you're in both deployments, you're not really able to trust our ally there.
Well, fair, and that went both directions. I mean, they didn't know if they could trust us. As long as, unfortunately, as long as those workers stayed useful to us and didn't cause problems, it would be fine. But then that was their way of life, their means of bringing stuff to their family. And well, if you get kicked off of working from the American base, unfortunately, that was oftentimes a big mark on them in the Afghanistan work sector. So, unfortunately, a lot of people were really banking on Americans staying and or what we were trying to do there actually sticking and making it a country. So that I did see more, I think, individual Afghan effort on that, my second deployment of people really saying, yeah, I want to like do more for my country. And that just could be from the very specific perspective that I had on the two different ones.
How would you describe your sense comparing the two tours of how the war was going? So you're there 2009, 2010. In one way or another, I mean, the thought has to go through your mind, how is this going? And then 2012, 2013, same question, how is this going? I mean, did you look at it the same way? Did it look different? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, in 2009, we were already saying, why haven't we shit or get off the pot just yet? Because long drawn out wars, I mean, we had already crushed the Taliban in the first couple of months of, the war in Afghanistan. And it was very clear by the continued fighting that we weren't wanted there, and there was no way to get people to want us there. Again, it was one of these things that it's lost somewhere between boots on the ground, people that are truly seeing things like, hey, I can give you an honest assessment, and the inability to uh, accept such an honest assessment or but everything on paper says, oh, I don't know where the disconnect is, but there were a lot of them. And so yeah, by 2012, more of the same is like it's just kind of ridiculous we're still here. But hey, we're here for it.
Mm.
Speaking of the ridiculousness of it, just one of the most surreal things. I was walking to the to the tactical operations center to talk to the first sergeant about something, and there was guys out in the courtyard running a flag up the pole, letting it sit there for a second, running it back down, setting it aside, putting another flag on the pole, running it up. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Well, apparently they were selling flags back home that flew over the fob. Like for a second,
Like
and
selling them on eBay or something like that?
yeah, I don't I think it was a fundraiser, for the FRG back home or something like that. You could buy a flag that flew over fob airborne. But just kind of the ridiculous, just going through the motions. And to me, that hit me of kind of what that deployment was of like, why are we still here? We're here, like, okay, we're just running the flag up the pole, run it back down, and do it again.
Arrive in Afghanistan, your very first day, let's say your first 24 hours in country in 2009, what is your what's your early impression of the place?
That it was beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. I mean, coming in, at night or early in the morning, I'd be awake for both. It's just absolutely breathtaking, the sunrises and sunsets. Um,
Yeah.
Also, is just knowing it's completely different smells. It's like I grew up on a farm, and that's an essence of it, but it's also just it struck me as I'm out of my element. I'm in a completely different world now.
And how long were you in country before you had that first experience seeing something, hearing something, experiencing something that drove home to the reality that you were in a war zone?
Well, it would have been my not the first day in country, but I suppose probably the second day in country. The first day I got to Fob Tillman. Uh, Only been there maybe about 2 hours, and we got rocketed.
Incoming! That's inside! That's inside! Inside! Move it!
And there was just mountains all around the base. It was easy for somebody to crawl up the mountains, set up a rocket with good enough, and then book it before it even launched. And yeah, it got not very accurate. And I lost my. At first, rockets are scary. They make this whistling noise as they come in because they have spiral spigots out the back, so the fuel causes it to spin. And those suckers have some hang time. One time, a fellow medic, Corey Lanier, and I were out on the HLZ, and we heard that whoomp of the launch. So you know it's already launched. They're like, uh-oh. And then we hear the whistle, and man, that whistle seemed to last forever. And there's no cover in sight, dove for the ground. And yeah, missed us, but got a lot shot at us. So I suppose that was the first time.
The second deployment when you're with artillery, is that primarily um, providing fire support to troops out in the field who call in fire support?
Correct, correct. So we had large artillery pieces we took with us. I also had smaller howitzers and whatnot. But for the most part, I think our unit's tasking was a little bit more kinetic than what artillery normally would be. They did a lot of convoy escorts, a lot of just foot patrols too. There was MPs in our area too that got just tasked with. I mean, they weren't doing military police work. They were going out and doing patrols just like anybody else. I wore 3 different hats on that deployment. I was a trauma bed team leader in the aid station. Did the medical records administrator job, and then I was also in charge of all the medical supply on the base and all the bases around us.
And now again, I'm focused on the second deployment. What kinds of injuries are you seeing coming in? Are they dealing with IEDs and ambushes and things like that as well?
Yep, yep. It was on that second deployment that we had that triage issue with the ANA, where the American way of doing triage is you have your immediate, delayed, menial, and expectant. And whoever is, the worst injured takes precedence as long as they're not expectant. The way it is in the ANA culture is if the commander even has a scratch on his arm, he gets treated first before the guy with a sucking chest injury. So they came to the aid station, and we didn't have quite that extreme of an example, but ballpark. And ANA got really mad and started to raise arms at us for refusing to treat their commander first.
So in the first deployment, you are going out of the wire, and you're a medic, but you're also a combatant. And I'm interested, when you're in that vehicle, and now, one of the vehicles has been hit, and so it's on and ambush, or, And so you're going to respond as a soldier and, the process of fighting back. But as a medic, I'm imagining that that another part of your brain has to be listening out for that call and being prepared to respond to someone who's been hit. I mean, how would you describe that the kind of psychological state you go into as a medic when you're out and when something breaks, that there's action and you're waiting for that call?
It's a spin up. Um, but it's also not just sitting around doing it. The two have to coexist simultaneously, because at any point when you're treating a patient, the situation could change completely. And when you thought you were in cover, all of a sudden now no, because there's airburst mortars coming in. You have to be able to flip back and forth. It's from for me, it wasn't one or the other. It was the two blended together. Is again through superior firepower. Then if I shoot the other guy before he shoots one of my guys, I don't have to treat one of my guys. That's preventative medicine, and I'm a good shot, especially on reflexive shooting. The two have to coexist simultaneously. There's so many facets of it. It's not just keeping an ear open for the call of doc, but also if you hear that call, not just immediately flipping around and running blind into that situation. You have to check to make sure that because it's not just about creating another casualty. It's about creating another casualty when now you don't have somebody that really knows what they're doing with casualties, especially more than one. The psychological impact of an infantry platoon or any platoon losing their doc is it can't be quantified. My guys told me several times on just like really like those moments when you're like the truth comes out, you're on guard shift with someone and just like, hey, several of them told me they wouldn't do what they did if they didn't know that I had their back. For a while when we were at that shitty little compound in Margaux, a couple of my guys would wake up screaming in the middle of the night for me. They'd wake up crying out for Doc. I'd go over there, with my rifle and aid bag, ready for, hey, what's going on? Nothing. It happened multiple times. Well, you guys got to know that they can trust you, and you have to know that you can trust them too. There's a whole lot woven in, and then there's just to kind of tugging on this thread a little bit more to give you an idea of how many things you have to be aware of at any given moment. Every single step you take has to have a plan B, C, D, and E as well, because you step down, you feel it shifting, you got to be able to respond quick. The rock on the mountains of Afghanistan is really breakable like slate. So you're going down a mountain and you might have a good grip with your heel on some rock, but that's just going to shear right off. So every single step you take, and plus you're looking out for landmines. And plus, not only that, looking where your feet are going is not the priority. It's looking for the enemy. So that there's so many things that you have to be aware of and incorporate at the same time.
And as all this is going on, if you've got a wounded soldier, and you did, just doing that assessment process and figuring out what to do. I mean, it sounds like, it's not just incredibly taxing physically, but taxing mentally, just because of things you have to pay attention to, think about, and decide on in a matter of seconds.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. These guys calling out for you at night, I've talked to Vietnam vets who are medics or corpsmen, and they say that that the guys they were with, the soldiers or the Marines they were with, they saw them as the medical guy, but also the medic or the corpsman also kind of became the counselor, the pastor, the confidant. Sort of the soldiers look at the medic or the corpsman, not just as a healer when he's wounded, but as a healer in general. Was that your experience?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, some of my guys have told me things that, yeah, I'm going to take that to the grave because that was in confidence, and well, I'm not going to betray that. Yeah. Um, I definitely also tried to, throw goofiness in there, do little things to just when we're going out to Marga, it would be for 3 weeks at a time at one point, and it was just there was no electricity, no plumbing. We'd run out of water and food, and the food that we ran out of was MRE. So when you got resupplied, it wasn't like, oh hey, more of the same, and a lot of times they were expired. Yeah, come January, February of that first deployment, I'd say a good 30% of our MREs that got delivered were expired by 4 years. Yeah.
By 4 years.
So I was able to find some of the old menu items that weren't made anymore. And I didn't eat the cheese because the cheese was bad. But the chicken tetrazzini and the beef teriyaki, those were actually quite good if the
E-
packaging was still fine.
Even if expired?
Mhm.
Did your soldiers, when a fight broke out, did they sometimes, sort of tell you specifically, you don't go, stay in a safe place? I'm bringing to this things I've heard from medics and corpsmen in Vietnam who tell me that, the Marines or the soldiers they're with would tell them, if things break loose, you need to stay in a safe place. Don't put yourself in unnecessary danger, because someone gets hit, you're going to be putting yourself in an even more dangerous position. So minimize the danger until that happens. Did that pan out in your case?
Yeah, not so much in words, but yeah. There's a couple times where I was heading out to go to someone and I got snatched and grabbed back. Um, It's like, hey, no, no, don't go out there just yet. One time I took cover in a place that I considered just fine. I was looking at the geometry of it and like how far away he was. Like, I'm good here, better than getting up and moving through the open to that spot. And they, everyone was freaking out, like, "Doc, get over here." Yeah, yeah, to an extent. I mean, I don't think anybody ever had to tell me after, other than those couple times that just grabbed me physically from going. But yeah, when we'd get complex attacks at Marga, when it was just the shitty little compound, yeah, I stayed in the main building. I'd have everything, my aid bag strap, everything ready to go, and just be sitting there waiting. But as much as I wanted to go out to the wall and get some as well, I knew that that was not my job, not my place, and that I would get yelled at back to just to go back.
One of the things I want to ask you about, since it's a theme that's come up with the soldiers you served with in your first tour, these BDAs, these battle damage assessments.
Mhm.
So what was a BDA, and what was the issue with that for you guys there?
Well, BDAs quickly became our most hated mission that we would go on in Afghanistan. We would get attacked quite a bit in Afghanistan through various means. The cheapest way typically was to just launch some 107 millimeter Chinese rockets at us, the ones that would make that little whirring noise going through the air.
Yeah.
Not very accurate, couldn't be shot for very far. I think their maximum range was 7 or 8 kilometers. But they were annoying, and uh, it was just one of those things. There was no way to stop it. I've seen them punch through concrete walls. Their blast radius is very small, but if that one has your number on it, there's not much you can do about it. So they'd attack us with those quite a bit. And so I don't know whose idea this was, but our SOP, our standard operating procedure, became that anytime they fired rockets at us and we fired in return our 155 artillery guns, somebody higher up wanted us to physically go out there and look at the site where our artillery rounds landed so that they couldn't claim that we killed sheep or children or to see what we had blown up. I don't know. All I know is that we were tasked anytime that we took rockets and our guns fired in return, all of our stomachs just sank. And we knew that, and these missions were called BDAs, Battle Damage Assessments.
Yeah.
And we knew that this was a terrible idea because you are letting the enemy set the pace or set the situation. And if we 100% of the time respond in the same way, then they know that they can exploit that. They have a saying amongst the Taliban of the Americans have all the watches, but we have all the time. Sure, we might have all this technology, all these tactics, and every cool little doctrine down to the minute. All they have to do is sit around, watch and wait, and exploit the weaknesses that they just observe, and that's their strength. So of course they started setting traps for us. They started setting ambushes and whatnot. And yeah, we all knew this. Just we were mad about it. I mean, even the least tactically proficient guy in our platoon would be bringing up points about how bad this is. Like, hey, have you considered this aspect? And that's not something that he had been regurgitating. Just the lowest guy on the totem pole is pointing out how bad of an idea this is, and yet somehow it doesn't get translated to the higher ups. Like, hey, we can't be setting patterns that the enemies are obviously going to exploit, because they would shoot from hard to reach areas, specifically trying to draw us out where we'd have minimal cover and support. And sure as shit, they were successful on hitting our platoon on the 4th of November 2009. Early morning, they launched a couple rockets at us, guns fired back. We didn't even wait for the warn-up, the frago, nothing. We knew the guns fired, we're going out. So we start prepping the trucks, getting all the guns up into the turrets, getting everything revved up, run up, spun up, and we get delayed for a good 2 hours because the ANA couldn't get their shit together and to SP. Like, I don't know if they couldn't find their first sergeant even. It was a while. And so meanwhile, enemy knows we're coming. Now they have even more time to prepare. None of us had a good feeling about it, but we just sat down, cleaned the weapons a little bit more, gave them a little extra lube, just made sure everything was good to go. And we rolled out there. We were a good 19, 20 clicks from Fob Boris. And we started entering this little valley. There's no roads over there. It's just dry riverbeds called wadis. And sometimes they're wide enough and flat enough that you can try to drive on. And well, MRAPs aren't designed for off-roading, but we put them through the paces anyway. So as we descended down into this valley, that was it became kind of a box valley, because up ahead the valley curved. So then there was 3 points on which we could be surrounded, and that's exactly where they sent their trap. As we rolled into this, not knowing any of this really just yet, we did see a guy, a local farmer, wearing his man dress, walking out with a shovel over his shoulder, just kind of. I was in the last truck, so I think his guard had slipped a little bit of the face he was showing to like all the trucks before, because by the time I saw him, it was the most shit-eaten grin, like, I am getting away with this, and there was a little waggle to his hips as he's walking. I was like, oh man, he just put in an IED. And I was in the comms on the truck, I mentioned it to our platoon sergeant, who was the TC of my truck. And he just said, you don't know that, and just rejected it. And sure as shit, the ambush kicked off with that IED going off. Hit our first truck. They didn't take too much damage, I don't think. They had the mine roller on that day. But then they opened up with RPGs all around us, PKMs, AKs, you name it. There was even airburst mortars after a while. Up on the hillside to our left, there's a couple of pictures that I gave you, sir, that show the clots up there on the left. Yeah, off to the right, they didn't start shooting for a little bit. That was one of the tactics, is they tried to disorient us.
So you have incoming, morning of November 4th, 2009. You fire back. And so the standard operating procedure is, if you fire back, then you go out to take a look to make sure no civilians or no animals were killed. The enemy knows you're coming. In
Mhm.
fact, they may have fired the rockets with the intention of bringing you out, knowing that here we know the Americans are going to come if they fire back at us. On the way out, you see this guy walking with the shovel. Obvious question is, why is he walking around with the shovel out in the middle of, it doesn't sound like, I mean, it's not obvious that he's farming. So pretty good, pretty good reason to think he's planting an IED, but you can't do anything because you don't know that for certain. And then then the IED comes and the ambush takes place. I mean, what goes through my mind is, as you said, the lowest ranking soldier can figure this out. If they hit us and we fire back, and then that means we're going to go out to where we fired, then you don't have to be very smart to figure out. You could even be an illiterate person who lives in a mud house to figure out that if we fire at them, we can bring them out here, and then at the perfect spot, we can ambush them. And they can't do anything to our folks unless they have positive ID.
Mhm.
And so we know who gets the first shot, and we know who has the advantage, at least at the outset.
Mhm.
I doubt that you're gonna have a specific answer to this, but you don't have to be smart to figure all this out. Any person of average intelligence can figure this out in a very brief time. Why did this persist? I'm assuming that your officer is, talking to folks up the chain and saying this standard operating procedure is counterproductive. It's not working. It's putting our guys at risk. Do you have any idea why this continued even after it became clear that it's not a good policy?
Probably had to do with money and payouts ultimately. Uh, Spitballing here again, but my guess is that money and payouts that we would have to give to Afghan locals who would get hurt in collateral damage. Now, whether they actually got it, whether it was actually us, I mean, it it seemed like the Taliban was shooting kids during firefights with us to try to blame it on us and sway the population away from us because we sure as hell weren't doing that. Um, there was that one firefight where the only thing that we fired was 40 millimeter grenades and 50 cals, and the father brought me his young child that had very clearly been shot with a small caliber, like crying. It wasn't just that he was there like, oh, hey, where's my payout? I mean, he was distraught, and of course he thought that we did it, but we hadn't fired anything of that caliber that day. And yeah, just there were a couple other instances of similar and just, I mean, trying to win the hearts and minds, but just like with an iron fist. That's oof, yeah.
So the Taliban is shooting kids, and you've got this story. I know there's another one. You have another child that's brought to you, right? Father
Mhm.
wants you to, what is that one?
We were on a mission to a village just outside of Margah, and this was after October, after one of the cornfield firefights. And this poor kid, I mean, he was carrying his son, who was 8 or 9 years old, and he had a very obviously misshapen head, a whole bunch of scarring, and was I, I hate to use the term, but basically a vegetable. He was not responsive to verbal stimuli. I mean, I didn't try, to elicit a pain response because I was just a mood. That would have been mean.
Mm.
But, the father handed me all this paperwork, and I read through it. It's the medical notes of what the American medical team did for this kid. He got found shot in the head after a firefight with us or second platoon. We rushed him to the American hospital and treated him, and good grief, it was a miracle that this kid was still alive. Reading through where the bullet entered, like what it did when it went in, like how they removed it, and just everything. And then, seeing uh, this kid still alive, still breathing. I mean, the quality of life, sure. I mean, he's gonna need a caretaker the rest of his life, but it was a miracle. And I unfortunately I had to tell the guy that there's nothing I can do. I mean, it's what can be done, and more has been done. And I know I asked him if his son, if he thought his son needed any like Tylenol or anything. Do you know if he has aches and pains? No way of verbally expressing that. So I didn't end up giving him anything like that, but it just I think that gesture of I still want to be able to do something for him. I think that meant a lot to him.
Yeah.
But I mean, oof, man, yeah.
So, I mean, so part of what I'm reading into what you're saying is that the Taliban knew that the Americans cared more, or at least were willing to respond more, to be more helpful to Afghan kids than the Taliban themselves were, that the Taliban themselves might be shooting kids in order to blame it on the Americans to stir up more anti-American sentiment.
Yeah, very well could be. I have no definitive proof of this, but there were just you get a sense of things. You also get kind of a combat sense. Like you asked me earlier about how I could tell tactics had changed and whatnot. It just is one of those things you kind of know, then you have to pick at that later.
Yeah.
I'm sure vets have talked to you about the combat sense before of just knowing. Um, on my second deployment, I stepped out of the aid station to smoke a cigarette, and I only got 2 puffs in, and I had a very, very clear mental image of somebody looking at me through the crosshairs of a rifle scope, finger on the trigger, ready, wanting. I just wanting to kill me was the gist that I got. Nope, nope, nope. Immediately put out the cigarette, went inside. The next day on that base, Afghan soldier got hit by a new marksman in the area. And then like days later, then we got the intel about it, and like, no,
Wow.
listen to your gut feeling in a war zone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the BDAs would be then linked to this, that,
Gut feeling.
if the Afghans claim, like, let's say we fire back and then the Americans don't come out, the Afghans can do things themselves and then blame it on the Americans and
Mm-hmm.
then get compensation that will come. And so I guess this is the rationale
Yep.
for the BDA. But it's not, so if you isolate that, then the BDA makes sense. But if part of this whole story is that the lives of Americans are being put at risk, and in some cases being lost, then that changes the whole calculation. But the problem is that the policy doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that leads to questions like, well, so what matters more? Who matters more to the American decision makers? Is that a question that came to the mind of you guys there?
Yeah, yeah. There was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of anger about it. Again, I just talked about that combat sense. And for every single one of us, anytime we heard our guns shooting back, oh, we hated it. Our stomachs would sink, literally. It's that gut, like, the beginning of the fight or flight. Like, I know we're gonna have to go do, and I know this is a bad idea. Um, and it's not just the BDAs. It's not just, one thing or the other. Um, there's multiple instances of how our command just big army in general didn't give a shit about us, and then our command seemed to take liberty with that. And because again, for the BDAs, I mean, the Green Berets in the area were telling our guys and our command, like, hey, you need to stop doing those. We're hearing things that they're going to use that against you. We're getting all sorts. let alone our guys like telling you, hey, this is bad. Um, and it was at multiple levels too. Yeah, unfortunately for us, it was a perfect kind of a shitstorm because we also had a platoon sergeant that didn't have the tactical experience to be leading a platoon on such kinetic, who also didn't have the mindset of being able to listen to subordinates when they make a good point. And yeah, and then that went on up to, we had a really good platoon leader, the one that got wounded. Really good dude, but I mean, he was kind of hemmed in by having, the platoon sergeant that was, I don't want to say too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a bunch of rocks and hard places after mission briefings, especially for BDA briefings. You'd see our squad leaders come back just beat red in the face, just trying to not just kick and chuck things into the corner. You could tell they just did their share of yelling and getting yelled at, and that's ultimately that didn't do any good. And soon I became of the mindset that nothing changes in the army unless somebody dies or gets very, very, very grievously injured. And yeah, well, haven't been proved wrong on that just yet.
Let's go back. So you see the guy with the shovel. You call. Sergeant says, "We don't know for sure. Can't do anything."
Mhm.
ID goes off, and now you guys are being ambushed. Pick it up.
Yep. So as the ambush kicks off, they started up opening fire on the left side and from the front. Um, and immediately upon this, we had a good sized A&A element with us, Afghan National Army. And they were interspersed in our convoy. The whole thought behind that was that will help motivate them to keep up with us because then it's not just a chunk of them, a chunk of us. It was, hey, we're in this together. Again, one of those things that sounds great on paper, but as soon as we started taking fire, they all fled their vehicles, doors left wide open, went and hid in the ditch. Dudes climbed out of the turret, went and joined the others hiding in the ditch, crying. I saw guys crying. Um, I wasn't out of the truck yet at that point, but I, from other people's stories, as soon as we took fire, they just exited the trucks. It's like somebody hit the eject button. I was in the back truck as the fire started getting heavier and heavier. I could hear it going on outside. Bruce was just rocking the 240 Bravo he had up in the turret. Um, I made sure he was fed with ammo. I just, clipped the next link together before he even ran out, just keep it flowing smoothly. He jammed pretty bad at one point. I tossed him up my Gerber from my kit. I still have that Gerber. I know it because it's the one with a broken blade. I'll never throw that one out. He got the gun back up and running in about 20 seconds, which is good because we didn't have any fire support. We were the back truck. There was at least two or three Humvees that were supposed to be in front of us that were the A&A that didn't have guns. So Bruce was running a good at least 180-degree arc of security for us of fire, if not more. And then dudes started popping up in the wadi behind us. And that's when Sergeant Frank Kara told me to open the door, the top door on the thing. Something I've done multiple times before. It gets too hot, you want to open that up, let a little bit of air in. Somebody rips one out, you want to open the hatch, get some fresh air in. But that day I could not open that hatch. I flipped both. You had to like pull, turn, and then push on both. That thing would not budge. The first time I heaved, it budged maybe about that much. But then it felt like an elephant was sitting on it. Every time I pulled, twisted, and shoved. And of course, I'm looking, make sure I'm twisting them the right way. That thing would not open. After about the fifth time, I was like shaking from frustration and I was ashamed. I held on to that shame for quite a few years. But reading Ronnie Bruce's book helped me because it told things from his perspective. I told Sergeant Frank Carey, like, I can't get it open. He shot me a disgusted look, kind of tossed me out the way and did it himself. The first time, I don't think he got it either. It kind of, but then he shoved it open again. And from Ronnie Bruce's perspective, he almost shot Sergeant Frank Guerra's head off because he was pulling rear guard on the truck, and that's where the hatch popped open. So thank God held the door shut on me that day. I was in the truck's comms at the beginning of the firefight, and I heard somebody say that we had wounded, and I asked, like, hey, didn't I just hear that we have wounded? And I was ordered to stay in the truck by the platoon sergeant. I asked again about 5 minutes later after making sure Ronnie B had a new belt all linked up. I ordered to stay in the truck. And then a little bit later, he got out the truck. So then that's when Sergeant Frank Carey and I looked at each other and let's get the fuck out of this truck too. So we did. We got out the back, and I think right off the bat, Sergeant Frankie had to shoot a couple dudes in the wadi behind us, if I remember correctly. It's a little bit fuzzy on that though. But then I joined the firefight, and yeah, every single A&A dude is just lined up on the wadi wall because they thought that they had cover. They thought they had cover on the left side because we'd only started taking cover from the left side first, and then they opened up from the right side too a little bit later. Yeah, and by this point, it had been confirmed on the radio that we had wounded. I went to go take off running in that direction, and Aponte grabbed me, and hauled me back. I don't think he sat my ass on the ground, but like it almost happened. I was pissed. He kept on saying that we had to achieve fire superiority. Achieve fire superiority. How the fuck are we going to do that down in a valley with 2/3 of our personnel just peeing their pants? Like, oh man. So
The Afghans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh no, none of our guys were. No. We didn't have a single dude
Yeah.
back there doing that. But it was a good 300 meters up to the front two trucks where we had our wounded. Because the A&A had been so stretched out. It was a good 300-meter sprint. It was Stu, Aponte, and I. Excuse me. The platoon, Stu, the platoon sergeant, and I sprinted up there, and yeah, I got up there. The gunner got hit in the leg. It was not life-threatening. He had put a tourniquet on, but it was already like falling off his leg. So I guess it's a good thing he didn't need it. Threw him a pressure bandage, told him to put it on tight, that he was fine. Ran around, found the lieutenant. He was very disoriented. He had burns on his face, shrapnel on his face, and some into his side and even underneath his plates a little bit. But he was breathing. He was conscious. I told him I'd come back to him. I just asked where's the rest of the wounded, and he said Julian's up in the truck, and so I climbed up in there, and I found out quite quickly that Julian was already deceased. From the extent of his injuries, it was almost instantaneous. Realized that. I had to, I checked for a pulse anyway because I had to confirm. Told Aponte as I got out of the truck that he was passed, and he just immediately started falling apart. It was on the battle. It's battle still raging. Sergeant Dixon is off next to the truck, just firing off one end law after another. Or AT4, whatever they were. He fired 3 rockets that day. I and another guy started trying to get Julian out of the truck because the door on his side would not open. It got welded shut by the RPG. But then I realized that I had other patients that I needed to attend to. So I said, sorry, I had to go treat the others. And I went and checked and found the other guys that were in the truck, under the truck. That was where they were taking cover. The interpreter, poor guy, he was scared out of his mind just doing the sand turtle, just trying to dig himself a hole in the ground. Yeah, but I found everybody else was alive and breathing, and we're likely to continue doing so. Looped back around to the lieutenant, and they were covering. He was communicating with fires in the battalion about what the jets could and could not do, because we finally now at that point had bombers on station, fast movers, airplanes that can carry bombs and different munitions. However, the enemy was so close to us that they refused to drop the bombs. Our lieutenant tried giving the go-ahead anyway. It got denied by higher ups. So the Jets, seeing the situation we were in, they decided to do it in intimidation pass. So they came down. They must have been 150 feet from the deck. It was like you could reach up and touch them. And man, that was loud. Oof. And it's just that building crescendo in the midst of everything else going on. It's something I'll never forget. Good grief. And I think it worked at least somewhat. I mean, that in addition to, Sergeant Dixon's three RPG or three rockets that he fired and everybody else pulling. I mean, there's Miller did fantastic that day. I think he got put in for a medal as well. He should have been. I know Cox did a great job. I just everybody that was there fought with all their worth. And um I but yet we were still here in this valley, still shooting up, still getting shot down at. And I said to the LT, like, sir, we got to get out of here. And I kind of snapped into it and yeah, hey, all right. So we started loading up trucks and just got the hell on out of there. Got as far as quickly possible away to HLZ and evac'd our guys. Unfortunately, the medic from the helicopter ended up leaving his aid bag. But thankfully nobody on the flight like needed it. Nobody lost their life because the medic didn't have his aid bag. But man, that was, I was mad about that. And then we held that position until second platoon came out as a QRF to us. And then they went out to the because the fucking commander still wanted the BDA done.
Wow, even after all this.
Yep. So
Wow.
when they came out there, I mean, I don't know if they actually still did that or not, but I mean, they pushed on into the area where we had been going. Well, the only reason to do that is to, mop up, the few remaining or to continue mission. So when second platoon came out there, they had the company commander with them, and before they showed up, one of the NCOs, my platoon, told me like, hey, keep this quiet, but you need to watch that sergeant. Make sure he doesn't kill the commander. I'm like, what? You heard me. I'm fucking A. So, yep. And he tried to duck me a bunch of times. Well, I know that he noticed me shadowing him, and he tried to give me the slip multiple times, and won't say who. And I was conflicted about that duty myself at that point. But
So, I mean, the possibility, what they called in fragging in Vietnam, just the feeling that, in a sense, you've got enemy out there who are trying to kill us,
yeah.
and you've got an enemy inside who doesn't care if we get killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the feeling.
Yep. And the feeling is like, well, if you won't listen to the good intel from, do you trust your NCOs or not? And all your NCOs are telling you something, and no, now you got to come out and see for yourself. Well, yeah, that's a tough one.
How long did that whole firefight go on?
Oof.
Just roughly.
Time gets so warped in moments like that, sir. That is so hard to tell. I've asked myself that for years.
Yeah.
I would, my best estimate is about 25 minutes. It was a while. I was in the truck. I don't know, 5-10 minutes before getting out, but that maybe it was only 45 seconds. I don't know. I I know that I went out into a literal shitstorm of bullets flying everywhere and explosions and shrapnel and everything. I don't remember hearing a single gunshot until I started shooting my own rifle about 2 minutes after I got out the truck. But I know they were close, and I'd see impacts around me. Couldn't hear them. It's just additional information that your body doesn't need at the moment to make its decisions. Like, okay, it's there.
Mm.
because again, there's already so many things to be focused on, to have in mind, that some of the details become kind of cut at the corners.
What is the process after a firefight's over and let's say the firefight's over, the casualties have been medevaced, and now, the soldiers, you guys are just looking around at each other like, okay, well, so here are the ones who made it through that one. What's, you know, kind of that process, that first 20 minutes, that first 30 minutes after the firefight's done, you've got the casualties out, and you can, in some sense, take a breath. Then what happens over those next 20 minutes or so?
First thing is you smoke a cigarette. Whether you smoke or not, you're smoking a cigarette. And then it's just because a lot of that is just getting the jitters out, the residual adrenaline, because adrenaline is very useful. But if it's an energy source, and if you don't have an outlet for it, or once your energy that required it stops, it just sits there and it like reverberates in your body. And so sitting there and smoking a cigarette to calm your nerves, it works. Because
Hmm.
that's the thing. Before you even really want to talk to anybody, you want to just sit there, collect your thoughts, so you can form a coherent sentence. Because you can't unless on adrenaline. If you're at peak adrenaline, you can function, you can form coherent thoughts. But anywhere in between, if you're not at that peak and maintaining that, just wait for it to either go back to zero or back up to 100. And that's
Hmm.
for me, that was just like decompress time. I'd pull my notebook out of my sleeve and just start writing down the notes from it, just to remind myself, particulars, because as a medic, anytime like that something happens, you're going to be writing an action report about it. Um, and it can be hard to remember the details, especially if you got concussed yourself through the process. So,
And did you?
through the 17 September attack, yes, the day that I was in a truck that got blown up. Yep.
So I'm imagining the soldiers pulling out their smokes and going through a cigarette or two. And then is that the process of what did you see? What did you see? Or just guys, here's what I saw, or is that not what happened in
No,
you?
no, definitely, definitely. Just generally it'd be more along the lines of how many did you get? Or did you see that when that happened? But yeah, that's generally the gist. It goes from real, like once everybody's kind of come down, typically the first two things said are going to be like the most real things you've heard in your life. And then after that, it gets pretty ridiculous of just kind of like laughing and just laughing at the trauma that you just went through, really, as part of a way to deal with it. Cope with it, wrap your mind around it, get past it. Um, in certain respects. Now, I mean, of course, we don't laugh about our own wounded. Important distinction.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you that. And again, I'm drawing on what I've heard from Vietnam vets who will talk about, this powerful sense of commitment. All the war in Vietnam was me and the soldier next to me.
Hmm.
And this, I would put myself at risk for that soldier. I know that soldier would put himself at risk for me, this very tight bond. But then if that soldier next to me ends up being hit, and either killed or wounded, but is gone, then what these Vietnam guys do is they just kind of shut that down and then just keep going. And at some later point, then their mind will go back to that. Um, you know, so you mentioned Julian. I mean, how does that is this just the psychological reality because you know that you're gonna have another mission again soon? You know that you're gonna get ambushed again soon, you know that there are gonna be IEDs again soon.
Hmm.
Is it almost just psychologically necessary just to, in some sense, at the time, just kind of let it go?
Yeah. I mean, as much as you can, You find after a while that the only useful emotion in combat is anger. And it's hard not to translate that lesson into all life. Like, hey, all the time, anywhere, the only useful one is anger. Um, so yeah, well, and a lot of that anger, wasn't just directed at the Taliban, it was at our own leadership too. Because we continued to get shit orders and get the short end of the stick time after time. Uh, I forget exactly when it was that we tore down Margah, but that was another thing that the lowest person on the totem pole was saying, this is a stupid idea. Like, we can't expect anybody to hold a tiny unfinished base at the foot of a mountain when there used to be a large American military base at the top of that mountain. Oh, we're just taking that away, just run business as usual. No. We were told that we didn't know what we were talking about. There's a picture I included in there, sir, of just another example of the BS. It's of all the water bottles. There's a jerry can of diesel sitting next to this ginormous pile of water bottles that still had water in them. And we got the order to burn them with water in them. I even said we need to sit here and uncap them and dump them out. And we were specifically told not to just burn them as they were. Just the stupidest thing I've ever been told to do in my life. All right, I did it. And the result is exactly like I said, they won't burn.
So you mentioned Bo Bergdahl. If you could walk us through that story, how the story of Bo Bergdahl and how your service, how these two things crossed.
Well, I was on my way back from my mid-tour leave, which I went on in early June. So I was coming back end of June, when Bo Bergdahl traded his guard shift that he had with one of his platoon mates. Thankfully left his night vision goggles and his weapon on base, changed into some civilian clothes that he had brought, grabbed a couple water bottles, a knife, and a notebook, and left his base. And all the air got diverted. All the helicopters, planes, anything that could surveil countryside got diverted to look for Bo Bergdahl. So the group and I that were on our way back from mid-tour leave got stuck on a base for a good 7 days. And we were only supposed to be there for half a day initially, but okay. But being there, we were in the transient tents and we got to talk with people coming through, and we talked to a couple of QRF squads, quick reaction force, that were going through looking for Bergdahl. And one of them were a couple of his platoon mates, and they told us some stories. So like already at that point, I knew that the official story that was going out was BS, because they were saying that he got left behind on a patrol, like a patrol left, without him. He like lagged behind or was pulling rear security. Nobody called for him and he got captured by the Taliban. No, he went off looking for the Taliban to talk to them, be friends with them. I don't know. Well, they found him and they took him, and it didn't go for him like he thought it would. And waddy dotty, everybody was looking for him. There's at least one service member that got outright killed out looking for him. A lot of people wounded, myself included. Um, he was in, we had good intelligence that he was in our area, really good intelligence. And we were right on the border of Pakistan. We knew that they were trying to get him out of Afghanistan into Pakistan, because then our hands would be very much tied on being able to go after him. So his platoon mates told us that he used to, just look out of the mountains like, oh, I just want to go live out there someday. And in the month before him going off base, he had shipped home his personal laptop and a bunch of other stuff that anybody that's deployed in the modern age knows that you do not send home your deployment laptop. Not for, I mean, well, sure, you don't want your mom to look through your search history, but what else do you have? Like, that's your lifeline. Like, that's your one piece of technology that you have during deployment. Like, you don't just send that home willy-nilly. He sent all of his personal stuff home before enacting this plan to walk off his base. and join the Taliban. And so he did. Yeah, we were out looking for him.
So when was it then that you were on a mission that involved, at least in part, looking for Bergdahl?
Yes. So this was when Bo Bergdahl went missing. It was at the very end of June 2009. And it was then early July that we were stuck on a base. And being stuck on that base, actually, I got to help usher a couple of my fellow unit members home that got killed in action on the 4th of July. One of our sister companies, Able Nation, got attacked on the 4th of July with a very complex attack, and 2 of their guys died. And I was able to help send their bodies home. Being there, stuck there, that was the only. So this was very end of June, early July is when he walked off his base, and it wasn't until September 17th was the day that we were out looking for him. We had intel that he was in the Burmel district, which was where we were, not far from Fob Boris. So we went out looking for him. We went down the one wadi that we always use, that already at that point, at that early point of the deployment, we already knew was a bad route. People would get attacked on it all the time. It was one of the few routes, and it wasn't very good. So you had to slow down a lot. There's a lot of twists and curves. There's a lot of opportunity for ambush. The flat cornfields right along. And they don't grow corn in Afghanistan like we do here, where it's all nice, cultivated and tilled and planted in nice straight rows. It's planted by hand. And it's just, so it's not like, hey, you line it up and then you can see. You line it up and then you can see in any way, shape, or form. It's very good for concealment. And on this day, we made it to the village. Our platoon sergeant at the time split up the 4 trucks that we had. He left 2 of us down right at the mouth of this wadi, this Hell's Highway route Volkswagen. He left us right at the mouth of the village leading to that wadi, 2 trucks right down there, and then took the other trucks with him up to the village, which terrible. You don't split up your troops like that. Now you have both, yeah, all 4 of them are less protected than if they were together. And enemy took advantage of this. They let us sit there for good, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. Again, it's hard to reckon time after the fact. We were sitting there in the truck. Kevin Garland was driving. Hickson was the TC, the tank commander, the passenger seat. We had Gus Shear gunning for us. Brandon Truex was in the back with me, as was Jordan Martinez. And we were sitting there and just BS and just typical dirty grunt talk. And all of a sudden, just the loudest slap you can imagine just rang out on the side of the thing. And we knew immediately there's no question of, hey, what was that? That was an incoming round. And immediately Gus started shooting back. He had the Mark 19 up on the roof, the automatic grenade launcher. But these guys had come in close too. So they were almost too close for the grenades have to travel a certain distance before they'll arm, is just to prevent, from accidentally hitting the turret guard and then blowing up the entire truck. They have to go a certain distance, and they were almost within that distance. So it made his job, and plus they were scattered out too. So he's returning fire. We're trying to look from in the truck to see where to shoot back to, when a second round hit the truck on the front, on the driver's front tire. Shook again, we were getting tossed around the truck like popcorn. Handed up some more ammo to Gus. I went to go try to open the rear door. This was a Max Pro, not the RG-31. The RG-31 had a gas pneumatic, and it opened the door sideways like that. The Max Pro had a drop down door that went down like that. And you had to disengage a combat lock to be able to put the door down. And I know how to open the doors. I was a new medic for this platoon. I think I'd only been with them for a week at that point. But going into and out of trucks, as a medic, like, I need to know if things happen, how to be able to get in and out of this thing. I couldn't get it to open. I disengaged the lock, worked the toggle, nothing. I told Martinez, hey, come over here, help me with this. He's like, well, you just gotta, oh. He's messing with it too. Door will not open. And just a half second later, wham, a third hit on the side of the truck. And that one actually came through the side of the truck. And immediately just the halon system went off. There was a flash of fire and the overpressure from that explosively formed projectile. Just oof. And I remember thinking like immediately after it happened, as it was happening right after, Saving Private Ryan got that scene exactly right, where the captain's on the beach and a shell goes off close and it's just bam, everything's in slow motion. People, it just comes back 100% accurate.
Hmm.
I remember my own voice sounded it sounded 15 octaves deeper. And it was weird. I was kind of freaking myself out just by talking. But then I started looking around. We in the back were okay. Martinez had taken shrapnel to the eyes. There was a whole lot I could do for him at that moment. I told him, "Don't look around. Just don't touch it. I'll be back." Checked Truex. He was okay at the moment. Our gunner got a bunch of shrapnel to the legs, but he was okay, and he was returning fire still, which was good. And then I looked in the front past the gunner, and I saw that the driver was slumped over. I'm like, oh boy. So I tried to get through, but the gunner's legs were right there. So I just slapped him on the legs like, Gus, put your feet here and here. He did it as I was telling him. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I undid the little seat thing so I could crawl through, and I crawled up and just started, put a bandage on his head, checked him, saw what had happened. The RPG round had entered and exited the back of his helmet. It hit the back of his head, so it did crack his skull a bit. He is still alive. He is still alive. Oh man. But yeah, he was not in good shape. And I after bandaging him, I turned to look at Hicks, and he was just all peppered up and down from his face on his side. And also not doing great, but he was breathing, he was conscious. Okay, so by that point, oh, that's right. Somebody grabbed my foot and started pulling. I had forgotten about that until just now. That's right. Ruben Acosta grabbed my foot and started, because he thought I was a casualty. He thought I was wedged up in there. And I kicked him in the face. Oh man, I'd forgotten that until just now. Okay. Um, okay, we were good. The back door's now open. All right, so I got out from underneath the gunner and came around. The driver's door was still locked because it was combat locked, and we had to get a special wrench. So I pulled security. And as soon as I heard them say that they had the door open, I turned back around and started, for the driver's door, and I saw somebody else climbing up on the steps. And I grabbed him and threw him out of my way. I later found out that was second platoon's medic. Sorry, Yates. I didn't know you at the time. But I got up to Garland. We got him out of the truck. Got him up to got him in a different MRAP, and I'm doing the spider monkey over him in the back of the MRAP because there's not much room. I would just feet and hands are where they can be, treating him as well as possible. Considered trying to go for an IV stick while we were driving, but we were bouncing around way too much. But Garland kept on losing consciousness on me, and so I pulled out an NPA, a nasal pharyngeal airway. It goes in your nostril, goes back behind where your tongue is. So even if you're unconscious and your tongue falls back, you won't choke to death. And I told him, like, hey, if you're gonna go unconscious on me, I'm gonna put this NPA in. And his eyes flew open and he swung at me. I'm like, whoa, okay. And one of the guys like, Doc, he doesn't like NPAs. All right, game on. So now I knew how to keep him awake. And anytime his eyes started to close, I told him that, and his fists would come back up. I'm like, good, stay in that fight to survive mode. And got him to the HLZ. We were waiting on the HLZ, and I'm going over vitals and everything again, and I'm checking his head wound. And somebody comes up and he's like, hey, make sure you don't give him any fluids because he has head injury. Like, I fucking know my job. How about you do yours? All right, Doc. I found out later that was the platoon sergeant for second platoon. My bad, Sergeant Shekels. Yeah, the choppers came, got my guys that were wounded, took them off. I didn't end up going. I asked Truex if he wanted to go. He said he was fine. Later, we did find a piece of shrapnel in his arm. So I'm the only person in that truck that didn't take any shrapnel. But I was sitting the closest to where the RPG ultimately came through when the first round hit. Um, Shortly after that is when that Afghan man brought up his dead son to me. And he just this tiny little 5.45 by 39 millimeter bullet wound. Um, yeah, felt so bad for that guy, but there was no way that we had killed him because we only fired the Mark 19 from our gun and the 50 cal from our sister truck that came up to help us. Um, the enemy is the ones that fired small caliber that day, so it doesn't undo his son being dead, unfortunately. It just
Yeah.
for me that is one less thing to carry though. So
Yeah. Were you confident when Garland was medevaced? Were you confident he was going to make it?
yes, I didn't have any doubt about it. No, I figured the hardest part was keeping him alive to the HLZ. I probably convinced myself at some point along the way that like if you get him there, he will survive. So yeah, in my mind, I got him there, so I didn't worry about it any further.
A couple minutes ago, you said that was one less thing for me to carry.
Hmm.
What did you mean by that?
Oh man, being Doc, you got to carry certain things with you the rest of your life. Uh, it's just details. There's things that I'll do that I wouldn't ask anybody else to do. The day on the 5th of November, one of the sergeants in our platoon ordered the guys to go start cleaning out the truck that Julian had been in. And I put a kibosh on that. I said, fuck no. Because none of them questioned it. None of them complained. None of them said shit. But all of them just, you could see the droop and just the slow trudging towards the trucks. And I said no. I told them to turn around. They didn't question it that either. Um, and there's details from that
Well, meaning that you were going to clean it out yourself?
yeah, but at least, well, I thankfully I got another medic and a couple mechanics to help me, but this was our platoon mate. I don't know. That's too much.
What was it that made it seem like that was the right thing to do as the medic to say, no, these soldiers they should not do that work. I should do it. I should get people together and do it. It should be me, not them.
Because of how graphic the injury was, because of what cleaning out the truck entailed, because nobody wanted to, as man, but I've seen more than most, and so that to me made it kind of my. Again, these guys were barely holding it together. I'm not trying to throw them under the bus or anything, but I mean, we've been railing for months that BDA. That we were getting surprised that it hadn't been worse sooner. Um, we've been railing against this for a long time, and we knew it was coming to a head. That was the only logical progression. And so just the frustration and the anger and just so many of us were just so close to the breaking point. Because also during this firefight, two of our our squad leaders weren't even there for it on November 4th. They were coming back from leave. It was we only had each other, and I guess I also knew that my gesture of offering that at the very least was going to be appreciated. Uh,
Is it also, getting back to something we were saying earlier? I mean, the idea of the medic, not just as the guy who responds when someone's hit, but the medic as kind of, the counselor, the guide, the pastor, I mean, is that part of it too? Like, here's something really terrible about the war that I'm going to use your phrase, I'm going to carry this burden
Mhm.
in their place. This is a burden they don't have to carry. I'll carry it for them.
Yeah, no, I was sorry, I was just laughing because I just realized like, well, yeah, docs are the heavy carriers, both physical. I mean, the argument would always break out between the RTO, the radio telephone officer, whoever was carrying the radio, the ammo bearer, and whoever else, like who carries the heaviest backpack. I wouldn't ever weigh in. I'd listen, then I just when we'd stop for patrol, I'd unclip my bag and just set it next to one of theirs and just let them pick it up. I'm like, oh shit, I'm like, no, all right, just put it back on and keep on going. It's so, and that's why I was kind of laughing. I made that connection of not just carrying physically the heaviest bag, probably, but also, yeah, it's, huh, yeah, I just certain things that like it's a shitty job, like burning the shit out at the outpost. That and like placing the tubes for peeing into because we didn't just have urinals just everywhere. We'd put a pipe in the ground or whatever. I would do all that stuff. It was only my job to supervise, make sure it was done correctly. But it's a shitty job. I'm not just gonna be, oh well, I'm gonna stand around and make sure you do it right, but do it. That's not me. And I don't think anybody that thinks like that is ever gonna really be successful on a small team of people that can only rely on each other, that have to rely only on each other because help ain't coming from above. It's only coming from your left or your right.